Okay, guys, my name is Mickey. I'm going to be the MC of this afternoon part of this stage, so it's an honor to be here. And I'm not going to take much of your time because we have much more important and more interesting speaker now talking about negatively priced block space, since it might not be necessarily a bad thing, it actually could be useful. And I'm really honestly looking forward to what we're going to hear. So please welcome on the stage Asynchronous Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, so the title of my talk is It's Okay to Be Negative. Yeah, my name's Phil, co-founder of Elastic, and we're exploring block-space markets. And this is one of the theories we're going with. So if you have if this is more based on it's a mix of economics and block space, and just exploring the unique properties of block space that are not correlative of traditional commodities. So what is block space? This was, I think, a good point by Chris Dixon from A16Z, which is it's the hottest product to be selling in the 2020s. It is the product of blockchains. So any sort of blockchain provides its block space. It's not necessarily a single commodity, but a class of commodities, because every blockchain produces different kinds of block space. They vary in quality, availability, and flexibility, meaning the quality is basically how secure is it, the availability, is it accessible all the time? Do I need to check the Blockspace provider's uptime page to make sure there's no downtime at the moment? And how flexible is it? Can I just transfer tokens on a UTXO Blockspace model, or can I deploy smart contracts, or can I do only data availability, or how flexible is it? And sometimes, these all have their unique attributes, and it could be trade-offs. So having limited flexibility could be an advantage as well. So we're going to go over the supply and demand, the fee model, and issuance versus inflation. So supply and demand often dictates, the price of goods and commodities, but it's not so much the same for many instances of block space. And there's this great article by the folks at Z Prime who were talking about this really deep, and this is a really good article. I highly recommend it. It's called Beyond Layers. And they compare a block space to somewhat of a luxury good in some aspects. So despite at times being cheap and widely available, there are some resemblances of a luxury good, which they compare to an economic concept called Veblen goods, which is not, it's actually pretty controversial within the economics field if this is a real thing. But there are some clear indicators of evidence of the existence of such things, and they most correlate to luxury goods like a watch. Like if the price, usually when the price of something goes up, it's a signal to decrease demand or to create more supply. With Veblen goods, however, when the price goes up, it just makes the demand even greater. So if a watch is really cool or a piece of art, the price goes up, it might signal to more luxury purchasers that this is something I actually want when I didn't want before when it was cheaper. So they're typically high quality goods that are well made, and it's like a status symbol kind of thing. I don't know if block space is a status symbol thing. Although inscriptions could lead to that, putting inscriptions on a highly contested block with expensive gas prices may lead to more value for that inscription over others, but I don't think we've seen clear evidence of that so far. They're usually sought after by affluent consumers who place a premium over the utility. I'm not sure if block space is actually a Veblen good, but it does establish this narrative for something that's even more controversial in the economics space, which is Giffen goods, where the demand increases just like before as the price increases, but they're for inferior goods. An example of this would be like rice and potatoes. If the price goes up, the demand also may go up because there's not really any substitute for it. It's not like I'm more likely to buy caviar now that the price of rice and potatoes go up. I may not have any options in certain situations because it's a staple that I need. If I'm a DApp on Ethereum, mainnet, I don't really have an alternative. I don't have a substitute quickly. So yeah, tend to be purchased. Giffen goods can be purchased more by low-income consumers, but and yeah, they might be forced to allocate more of their existing budget to this good instead of, which is more important for people with limited budgets. So applications are the consumers of Blockspace. There are no substitutes for the class of commodities of Blockspace. I mean, maybe there are. There's maybe some arguments. If you think of it, let me know after. Within the class of commodities, there are plenty of substitutes now, though. So, instead of deploying everything on mainnet Ethereum, you can deploy certain things on rollups. If you're a rollup, you don't have to use call data. You could use blobs or an alternative DA layer. You might want a coprocessor handling most of your execution if that's very important. So yeah, there's a lot of substitution that's now possible, but it is difficult. It's not so fluid and liquid in a simple way because blockchains are inherently designed to be self-contained systems. So there's a few ways the supply and demand can affect pricing though. So for instance, if you see that there's a lot of transactions in a block, but the capacity has not been met, the cost per transaction will remain relatively the same before you reach that limit. And that leads to a higher amount of total allocation of fees for the validators or miners in that system. So if you have something that's really, really popular, like a football game, a college football game, and imagine there were 10 or 20 seats still available, the cost per user isn't going to go up. There's no scalpers out there, really, really profiting. They're just trying to get rid of the tickets right before the game. But as soon as it reaches that demand, and then you have the secondary market that pops up, or primary market in the sense of Ethereum gas, where the fees can spike drastically. Now, it's not always the case that a Blockspace provider will have that capacity, and sometimes, it is an arbitrary limit of supply. Not completely arbitrary, but yeah, there is some limit of supply that, you can make more smaller, such as Bitcoin, where I think that's the case on the left. On the right, where you get something more appearing to be in high demand with very little capacity, although Bitcoin is still popular. So when you're thinking about Blockspace providers or blockchains as a revenue generation machine to keep themselves sustainable, there's something that occurred. If there's anyone was involved in the block size wars in Bitcoin or know about it? Yeah, okay, cool. There was a debate, long-standing debate, should they raise the block size limit of Bitcoin above 1 megabyte? And this is one of the people who was against that, and this was a very controversial email he put out to the mailing list where he was happy to see when the fees were exploding in 2017 on Bitcoin that the total amount of fees per block were exceeding the new Bitcoins being created for miners. And this, in his view, was a success because that illustrates that the fee model could sustain the security of Bitcoin, and their idea over time where the issuance becomes near zero, it could sustain itself only from fees. So the the reason the fee model is important is to understand like how it could sustain itself without some sort of subsidy from the outside or constant price increases coming in, constant influx of capital to keep the token going up. Token price in this talk, I'm kind of disregarding that for the most part. So you see in this chart where the red line across the top is the block size limit in Bitcoin. And you know, if you were involved in Bitcoin around 2012, 2013, 2014, you saw a lot of low fees, like near zero. You could actually give zero fee and get included in blocks quite easily. And when Bitcoin, and at this time, one of the selling points of Bitcoin was low transaction fees. It was part of that narrative back then as well. So it caused a lot of controversy when we saw in 2016 there's going to be an issue with the block size being too constrained. What's going to happen when we reach the limit? And around 2017, it did reach that limit. And you see that everything was pretty much capped. There's also kind of a slight downtrend after, which relates to, well, again, the substitutes. This goes into the substitutes. So around 2017, the whole blockchain space was beginning to have some formidable alternatives, such as Ethereum. And that wasn't the case earlier on. And I think there's a theory that that created an influx of a lot of capital and usage going into these other ones, where this is a correlated chart to the percentage, so of dominance. You know, you see Bitcoin was around like 90% or for many years, and really at the same exact time that they started reaching the limits and the fees started spiking exponentially, we saw a correlated event happening where the market share of Ethereum and others were gaining market share on Bitcoin. One could argue this might be happening to Ethereum right now with all the roll-ups, but I don't know. Let me know. So one common misconception or misnomer in this space is inflation. Inflation is the actual like effect it has on people. So we've seen clear inflation in the US dollar, euro, and other currencies in the last 4 years. Because the cost of our goods have gotten higher and the purchasing power of our money has gotten weaker. But the libertarians always tend to talk about, you know, the Fed is printing money, the treasury is printing money. It doesn't necessarily lead to inflation. It might have like blowback, like shockwave effects years or decades later, but it's hard to really correlate that. And it's surprising to see when you're studying a lot of tokens as well, how little it has to do with like issuing new tokens, you know, for miners and validators and stakers, how it's a very slow impact on the price per token. So a net positive token issuance does not necessarily lead to inflation. Bitcoin is always going to be a net positive token issuance. It might get down to near zero, but it never will. And net negative token issuance does not necessarily lead to deflation. So Ethereum has been net negative for the past year or so. And this was a year since merge, so 364 days since the merge, and you saw a net decrease of token supply to minus 0.2% per year, where Bitcoin saw a steady increase. Now, if you compare those two values together in the open market, it didn't lead to any clear indication that having less tokens actually creates more value per token. This can happen maybe next year or this year, and then you can tell me I'm wrong, but you have to wait some time or it doesn't exist. So since Bitcoin and Ethereum regularly reach their capacities and continue to regularly do so, their block space can often be revenue generating and self-sustaining. I think it's pretty clear that the communities and everything that developed on Bitcoin and Ethereum allow it to be self-sustaining. They don't need their foundations. They don't need the core dev teams necessarily. Other people would gladly step in and take those roles. It's clearly self-sustaining, and the Blockspace itself is a representation of that. So you can see sometimes the fees outpace the token issuance, such as in February and March, although in April and May that has not been the case. But this is something that only really occurs in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it's more in Ethereum than Bitcoin recently. So maybe we'll see some longer term effects of that happen. So, but what about the others? So everyone's favorite new chain, Solana, is you know, it has tons of users. It's seen amazing growth, objectively speaking, and the amount of developers that have gone on board to it, and so on. And but they have a net loss if you calculate things this way. Their fees are low. They're meant to be low. That's their entire value proposition. They have to keep the fees low. They still generate quite a bit. So $43 million worth of fees generated on Solana, despite their low fees. But the issuance and other things are leaning toward a consistently negative price of their block space. If they choose to use the fee model as a way to generate revenue in the future, they're going to have a bad time. They need to find, and this is the kind of core of the talk, is that, you know, they're subsidizing, and many others, all others, are subsidizing their block space heavily. Those incentives are good for builders, for sure. It's good for user adoption. So Solana does off-chain validator subsidies as well. And then there's other subsidies such as like on-chain treasuries or grant programs or good old business development. And there's a lot of like foundations that have a good chunk of this supply that they're not directly using for the block space. And if you factor that in, it's clearly negatively priced block space throughout. So yeah, there's this article that came out talking about the subsidies given to validators by our favorite research firm there. And other chains such as Polkadot have like this on-chain treasury that people vote with their tokens to disperse to different builders and stuff to pay for their costs up front. Yeah, Polygon has an ecosystem fund. We see, you know, other ecosystems have their own like kind of other funds that do this. Polygon is very famous for, you know, their big announcements with backroom business deals, which is fine, but it's just something that they're most famous for, but it happens throughout the space. And it's really okay. We need to be okay with the fact that other chains and modular block space providers have negatively priced block space. In some ways, we're not so different than Web 2. There's a lot of community bootstrapping, a lot of investment that needs to happen before you can call yourself a sustainable, profitable enterprise. And I think we're no different in that respect. Even Solana and these other mammoth alt chains have a way to go to get there. So if you use the fee model, you're going to have a bad time as a competitor to Bitcoin and Ethereum. The value proposition of all alternative ones is cheap fees, so we need to find other ways of generating revenue for these systems to be self-sustainable. Or ensure that those newly issued tokens get fed back into the system, then other costs can be managed quite more easily. So if all the new tokens issued are actually going first to the Blockspace users to put back into the system, we could have some novel concepts of keeping fees extremely low, especially for builders, and ensuring that the token issuance is going in the right direction, which is not on the exchanges, but back into the system. This is why it's okay to be negative, because you're pre-revenue. All the other chains are, and that's okay. There's going to be some time before these other chains really find their product market fit, and that's what we're doing at Elastic, is to find those opportunities and get people involved in benefiting from getting paid to use something. So Yeah, that's my talk. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them. Any questions?
So this is not entirely a question about what you said, but like a more broader point. This is a really interesting like area of things that I never really considered. Is there some like recommended reading that you could point us to, like some other talks or articles or books or something?
Definitely the Z Prime Capital article, Beyond Layers, ZEEPRIME, Z Prime, Beyond Layers. That's a very good article about this. On the more Blockspace side of things, if you are interested in that, that's the other article I referenced from Rob Habermeyer. What's it called? Oh, geez. Blockspace over blockchains. Blockspace over blockchains is a good article. So negative pricing rarely happens in practice. It happened quickly in 2020 with oil, where we had all these supply chain shocks with COVID, and they were producing the consistent amount of oil, but all the stores were filling up because nobody was using oil for travel as much as before, to the point where there was an afternoon where the price of oil went negative. They needed to pay people to store the oil. So that was like a nice flash crash. So you can look into negative pricing there as well. As far as its connection to Blockspace, the closest thing is the Z Prime article, I would say.
And like in more general kind of the intersection of economics, because so my interesting like the interesting thing is that Bitcoin kind of comes from a very libertarian point of view, which seems to have some fatal flaws in the economic side of things, like with their assumption that gold is kind of a good model for things and so on. But I haven't seen many talks about like this general area of like economics and blockchain in a non like libertarian side of things. So
The
do you have
non-libertarian side.
some recommendations there?
Not off the top of my head. Let's talk later. I'll look into some of my bookmarks and stuff like that. We can get into that. That sounds good.
Thanks.
Yeah, really nice talk. Just wondering what's your view on recent EIP 4844 blobs, the EIP 4844 blobs upgrades. So essentially, it's kind of block space, right? And widely used by layer 2s. But it creates, I think, a very interesting phenomenon like a lot of layer 2 reduce fee, but at the same time, Ethereum has a significant drop in terms of its fee. So how would you like to project the future and potentially like what may impact the future Ethereum roadmap to upgrade EIP 4844? Because right now the capacity is six blobs per block, but in the future may upgrade more. But from economy side, I feel I have to be concerned. Like looks like right now the blob is significantly underpriced for the
Is what at price?
significantly underpriced
Yeah.
for the layer 1.
Yeah. If there was a futures market in blobs, I would be buying right now for sure, because we're seeing So blob space has slightly different properties. Just because of the way the demand has been so far. It's a new product and it hasn't been adopted, and we've seen extremely cheap prices that we're not going to continue to see for sure. There are 6 blobs per block, you're right. If 3 are purchased per block, the price stays around the same, but as soon as it goes above 3, the price can steadily increase like a EIP 1559 style. So all we need to have are 6 roll-ups, and there's plenty of roll-ups consistently using blobs to consistently use those blobs to drive out the price, and then they themselves would probably want to pull out and let the price resettle. So we're seeing a unique moment in blob space right now. People can use it for inscriptions and so on. I think it's on the roadmap to be adding. I know it's on the roadmap to add more blobs, but I still think that it's always going to be more expensive than any alternative DA provider. Because the load on the nodes of Ethereum nodes are significantly greater, and the demand for running a node and processing everything else alongside those blobs is going to constrain the blob space as well.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Could you talk a bit more about what you're doing at Elastic in creating demand for this, what I see as just excess block space that we don't really need? I mean, I would think all block space becomes commodified, but we're clearly seeing some block space is more valuable than others. And now we have all these L1s and random rollups that no one uses, ghost chains. Why do we need to create demand on these? What is the thesis behind Elastic, really?
The main thesis is that I think it's a commodity or a class of commodities that can really be we can involve everyone into that. It is for the builders in the end. The main thesis is that there's a great disparity between the token price or valuation market cap of a block space provider and the utility of their block space. I think there's a lot of arbitrage surface area to get for people to understand that you can use negative pricing for your advantage as a builder, and also find ways to have a product market fit and new utility for that block space. The idea is you should be helping these blockchains put that new token issuance back into the protocol at first, and then finding more and more utility from there. We're heavily researching things like gas futures, blob futures, and so on. Be happy to talk to you after a bit more about that, but we are creating a sort of incentives market for data availability specifically based on the properties I've just mentioned.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that's all. Thank you. Thank you.